Hey guys, what's going on? Jacob here. Alright, so we busted some misconceptions and now we've got our tools set up to try out some web development. And what better place to start than with HTML? HTML, or Hypertext Markup Language, is the basis for everything on the web page. While CSS, PHP, and JavaScript are much more dynamic, HTML sets the basis for all of it. Created in 1993 with the help of Tim Berners-Lee, HTML lays out the page for the browser to read. If it's on the page, or even if you can't see it on the page, it's in HTML. But even as important as it is, it's super simple to learn. And once we get started, I think you'll see why. So let's get started. So this is the layout for a basic HTML page. Yes, that's all you need for a super simple page. Just a head, a body, and it all wrapped around by an HTML tag. We have a title that the browser reads and puts at the top of our little window, and we also have a heading and some paragraph text. And that's all you really need for a page. If you're someone who prefers to do to learn, pause the video now, open up your preferred code editor, then create this exact page with the name intro.html.html. And make sure to type everything out rather than just straight up copying it. You'll learn a lot quicker and a lot better. And before we move on, I do want to note this tag up at the top of the page. This helps the browser know what the document type is. For anything HTML, you'll use this tag at the top of all of your HTML documents. At this point, we should talk about tags and elements and what they are and how they're different. Tags are the things inside the bracket. So on this page, we have a head tag, body tag, HTML tag, title tag, and heading tag. When I say tag, I mean what's inside the bracket. Most elements have an opening and closing tag. The opening tag says what the element is going to be. So in this case, it's the HTML element. And it also has the attributes like ID, class, style, and other things that we can use in JavaScript and CSS. We'll talk about those more as we go on. Some elements, like the image element, which we'll talk about next time, don't have a closing tag. Instead, you put the backslash before the last bracket. Elements are the tags plus anything in between the opening and closing tag. The HTML tag is where everything happens in the HTML document. It provides the foundation for everything on the page. This tag doesn't have much in the way of attributes, although you can use the lang attribute to denote language, such as lang equals en for English. The head tag includes things you can't see in the browser, but don't let that fool you because elements included here are still read by the browser and can do really cool things, like set the title for the page, or include data that social media sites like Facebook and Twitter can read. And when we get to CSS and JavaScript, we'll include links to those files here. This tag is used to show the title of the web page. Your web browser will use this as the title for the window or tab, and once you start publishing web pages out on the actual internet, Google will use this title in its search results. Theoretically, this title can be anything, but it's common practice to just use the title of what's on the page itself. But it's just a suggestion. The meta tag provides more information to the browser about the page. For example, you can tell the browser what character set you're using the meta tag. Typically, this is going to be using UTF-8. Also, you can include information for social media sites like Facebook and Twitter for them to use, such as setting the title of the post for the page, or even the featured image that will go along with your link. Alright, so now we're going to move into elements that we can see, and those elements go inside the body tag. This is also where you can start adding ID and class attributes for CSS and JavaScript to read. The div tag is a tag that you're going to want to use to create sections on your web page. It's used in conjunction with CSS to create layouts and nice designs on the page. So going back to the example before, we can put the main heading and body text in one div and then some other text in like a sidebar div. But we'll talk more about divs once we get into CSS. Side note, HTML5 introduced a lot of cool semantic tags like article, main, and section. We'll talk more about these down the road, but just for now, they act more like div tags with a different name. Any tag with an H and a number between 1 and 7 next to it is a heading tag. This tag denotes that the text between the tags is a heading, and the numbers after the H do actually mean something. H1 is considered more important than H2. H2 is considered more important than H3, and so on and so forth. Most browsers also have a default style that makes H1 text bigger than H2 text, and H2 text bigger than H3 text, and so on and so forth. However, once we get into CSS, you'll see that you can make H2 text bigger than H1. But screen readers and crawlers like the one Google has read those headings in order of importance, and it does have an actual effect. So your most important text needs to be in an H1 tag, your second most important text in an H2 tag, and so on and so forth. The paragraph tag is the tag you're going to use the most often. This is for any body text, like text for a post or a page. And as you might expect, it creates paragraphs on your page. It creates a carriage return between the paragraphs that makes your post and text much easier to read. Side note, if you hit return or enter in the middle of a paragraph tag and don't add any other tags, you're not going to see a line break. Instead, you're going to need to use the BR tag or line break tag to create that break. Within a paragraph, you might want to have some text that a user can click and go to either a new page on your website or somewhere offsite. And that's where the link or anchor tag comes into play. The A tag or anchor tag is super simple to use. Wrap the text that you want to use inside the opening and closing A tags. This makes that text clickable. Then inside the opening A tag, include the href attribute. And inside of that, include a link to the new page. You can also use the target attribute to denote where the link will open, either in a new window or the same one. If you're wanting the new link to open in a new window, then you'll use the target blank attribute. And this is so that people will stay on your website even after they click the link. The span tag is similar to the A tag insofar that it wraps around some text and affects it in some way. Like the div tag, the functionality of the span tag is tied directly to CSS, so we'll talk more about it once we get to CSS. While we're on the topic of paragraphs and headings and divs and spans and links, let's talk about the difference between block and inline elements. Block elements are elements that force a line break between them and the next element. So a paragraph element, which is a block element, forces a line break between it and whatever comes after it. Inline elements don't do that, and they are instead in line with the page. So an A tag and a span tag won't create a line break between it and the next set of text. But like with headings, you can make any element inline block or inline block with CSS. Again, we'll dive deeper into that once we get to CSS. The last set of tags I want to introduce you to are the list tags. With HTML, you can create an unordered list with UL or an ordered list with OL. And the method for doing both is exactly the same. Inside the UL or OL element, place as many list item elements as you want. If you have an unordered list, you're going to see bullet points next to them. If you have an ordered list, you'll see numbers. You can also nest list as well. Add in another set of UL or OL tags before the closing LI tag and repeat the process. Before we close out this lesson, I want to talk more about the attributes that you can have with each element. As I mentioned before, you can have an ID attribute for each element on your page. This is meant to be specific for each element, and each element is only supposed to have one ID. So for a paragraph, we can add an ID of element-1. You can also have class attributes, and these you can repeat with each element, and also each element can have more than one class. So for each of our paragraphs, let's put a class of body text. And like I've said before, we'll use these more as we get to CSS and JavaScript. There's also a style attribute that you can associate with each element, but you need to use this attribute sparingly. The common rule is that HTML is for layout only, and CSS is for design. There are some cases where you'll need to inject some styling inline, but 99.9% of the time, your styles are going to come from CSS. There are a ton of different attributes that you can use with tags, but a lot of them are specific to one or two elements. So I'll talk about them more as we come across them. Finally, I want to introduce you to the web developer's best friend, the inspector. All modern browsers have this tool. All you need to do is right-click on the page, then hit inspect element or something similar, and you'll see this console pull up. Here you can see the HTML for the page, the CSS for the page, and the JavaScript that is affecting the page. And once we get to debugging, it's going to help you figure out what's going on the page. So use it. So that's all for today. Next time we'll talk about more advanced HTML, like tables, forms, images, audio, and video. And we'll put it all together for a working web page. But in the meantime, do you have any questions about what we went over today? If so, leave them in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. But until next time, good luck and happy coding.